Peace and blessings, family. This is Brother Shareef with the Hour of Power. Go to Hour of Power, Shareef Hamid on YouTube. Subscribe and share so we can continue to lift the mind, body, and soul of our people. If you're tuning in on Facebook Live, please hit the share button and hit watch party. Please hit the share button and hit watch party so we can invite a few more people in to this much needed dialogue. This is part 2, how African slaves were diagnosed with fictitious mental disorders in order to justify slavery. Part 2. We did part 1 last night. We had some technical difficulties. I'll just leave it at that. And somehow the part 1 got deleted from my page. But some people said they were still able to get the message, but it's not available on replay. You can figure out what that's about. But so we did part 1 last night. We're going to go deeper into this topic that I think is informative and information that our people really need to know, because I know for the most part it's not being discussed and explained. So with me having a mental health background and being, a counselor and a therapist, I do have some inside information on this topic and try to make it relevant till today. So again, hit the share button and hit watch party, and we'll go on and get started. And hopefully a couple more people will log on live so we can have a discussion. If not, hopefully they can catch it on replay. But for the few people that have tuned in, I appreciate your time. We're going to make it work either way. Before I get started, definitely go back on the page from Sunday when we talked about the mysterious deaths of Martin Luther King, Sam Cooke, and Bob Marley. We went deep into that topic and took the mask off and took the scales off of our people's eyes about what really happened to some of our freedom fighters. So I really need to get that uploaded on YouTube, so in case something happens to it on here, we still have that information. For those who are in the local area, we're trying to get at least 5 to 10 brothers and 5 to 10 sisters to come together so we can form our own study group, so we can talk about problems and issues in the community and come up with solutions to our problems. So that's what we want to try to do here in York. Others are encouraged to do the same thing. We want 5 to 10 serious-minded, like-minded brothers and sisters to get together, to talk in the same room, to dialogue, to talk about our issues, our concerns, and to come up with some solutions to our problems. So if you're interested in doing that, if you want to be a part of making a change right here in our city, please inbox me so we can get the ship moving on that. 5 to 10 serious brothers, 5 to 10 serious like-minded sisters that want to come together in the same room. No judgment, no male chauvinism, and us to come together and talk about our issues, our concerns, and how to make our community better. Please inbox me. Now, how African slaves were diagnosed with fictitious diseases to justify slavery, part 2. Just as a reminder, in case y'all didn't catch it last night and it's not on Facebook for replay, we talked about a doctor by the name of Dr. Samuel Cartwright, who back in the late 1840s and 50s was going from plantation to plantation in the South, diagnosing African slaves with fictitious mental disorders. One of the mental disorders that he diagnosed African slaves with was a mental disorder that he totally made up called drapetomania. You can look that up in the General Archives of Psychiatry, or you can just Google it and it'll come up. he made this fictitious disease up called drapetomania, which he said caused slaves to want to flee from their master and break their property. That's what he said. And he also sold the idea to slave owners that black people were crazy and they were unable to function without white supervision, which would justify slave owners enslaving African slaves and their mistreatment. That is what Dr. Samuel Cartwright came up with. Again, hit the share button and hit watch party. And for those who do hit the share button and hit watch party, I want to let you know that first, I appreciate you doing that, but second, when you start your own watch party, which I want you to do, I can't see the questions or comments that are being filtered through your watch party. It's streaming live, but I can't see it. So if someone has a question or a comment, long as it's respectful and within the line of what we're doing, you can just raise your hand and say, hey, Brother Shareef, Sister so-and-so, or Brother so-and-so has a question. Because again, I can only see what's on my page. I can't see what is coming through on your watch party, even though that is what I want you to do. But I'm just saying, you're more than welcome to raise your hand and say, hey, bro, and I'm not even sure if I'll be able to see that since you're on the watch party. I have to figure that out. But just get with me afterwards and I can get back to that person. So that was Dr. Samuel Cartwright made up a fictitious disease called drapetomania, saying it caused African slaves to want to flee from their master and break their property. Never mind that they kidnapped them out of Africa, got them on the slave plantation against their will, and every living being, every living organism wants to be free. He didn't mention that. He just said, we're crazy, which makes it a little more understandable why black people are a little apprehensive about getting mental health, about going to see a psychiatrist. Even if they're having some mental challenges, a lot of us are apprehensive because of this wicked history. And it was others who went around with this scientific racism, so to speak. Dr. Joshua Knott, we talked about him in the 1850s. He said, because of our knee joints and ligaments in our legs are different and longer, that proves that we were created to be submissive knee benders. That's what Dr. Joshua Knott said around the same time, and many others. We also talked about, so write that down in case you didn't get it last night. That's Dr. Samuel Cartwright. And he came up with this fictitious mental disorder called drapetomania. So when our freedom fighters tried to flee and they was rising up, they said, oh yeah, he told me they would break my property. He told me they would try to run. They're crazy. It is something wrong with them. I'm doing the right thing. I'm keeping them safe. I'm keeping our society safe, and I'm actually doing them a favor because they're crazy. They can't help it. And I'm going to show you even more in a couple of minutes how they brought that same idea, these same fictitious mental disorders into present day. This isn't just some slavery talk. It would still be valid. Injustice is an injustice. But I'm going to bring it up to present day because you got some naysayers that say, oh, that was slavery time. Right? Dr. Samuel Cartwright. Then, this is a little bit of review. Give me a black fist sign or heart emoji if you're with me. Then, we did a little bit of review, and we talked about how they switched around schizophrenia. Thank you. They switched around the mental disorder schizophrenia. When schizophrenia was first diagnosed and identified in this country in 1915 by a psychiatrist by the name of Eugene Bueller in 1915, it is said that this mental disorder, schizophrenia, which is a Greek word for meaning the splitting of the mind, and some of the symptoms or signs of schizophrenia, you've probably seen it. You may have someone in your family. God bless them. Hearing auditory voices, imagining things, hallucinating, thinking you're greater than what you are, extremely paranoid, thinking someone is following you, thinking that someone is poisoning you. My mom is always stressing I ain't living right, but I ain't going out without a fight. See, every time my eyes close, I start sweating and blood starts coming out my nose. It's somebody watching me at. I don't know who it is, so I'm watching my back. I can see them when I peep in the covers. And at night, you know the rest. My mind playing tricks on me. It's people that live like that every day. But this disease was said by leading psychiatrists that this affected stay-at-home white mothers, meaning schizophrenia, in 1915, 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s. It is said that this splitting of the mind, schizophrenia, mostly affected stay-at-home European white mothers. I showed you the picture. Let me see if I can find it. How they treated this schizophrenia with these white mothers, mostly white mothers. I showed you the picture how they treated them with a low-dose pill called Serapacil, and have a counselor there. You see the counselor there with the client and the patient, and they said they would give them a low-dose pill called Serapacil, and with a little bit of counseling and therapy, they were rendered clean, cooperative, and communicative. Back to normal citizens, just a little low-dose pill. Because remember, this is just stay-at-home white mothers. But now, in the 50s and 60s, when we started fighting back, when we started rising up against white supremacy, i.e. the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, the Civil Rights Movement, the Nation of Gods on Earth, and many CORE, SNCC, many other groups, we started fighting back. Now, what they did was change the narrative, the definition, even the meaning of schizophrenia to discredit, disable, and take away the credibility of black men, women, and groups that was fighting against white supremacy. Who did this? Some of the leading psychiatrists at that time. I read this last night. I'm going to just read it again. I'm going to keep it moving because I don't want to keep you long. Just giving you a little review since the video got deleted. Walter Bromberg and Frank Simon described schizophrenia as a protest psychosis, no longer clean, cooperative, and communicative, whereby black men developed hostile and aggressive feelings and delusional anti-whiteness after, listen to this, listening to words of Malcolm X, student of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam, aligning with groups that preached militant resistance to white society. According to the authors, the men required psychiatric treatment because their symptoms threatened not only their own sanity, but the social order of white America. Bromberg and Simon argued that black men who espoused African or Islamic ideologies, adopted Islamic names, and that changed in such a way to deny their previous whiteness in America or names, and in fact demonstrated a delusional anti-whiteness that manifests as paranoid projections to the Negro, to the Caucasian group. Now they needed medication. Now they were crazy. How did they treat this? Not with the low-dose Serapacil. Now they treated it with Halidol. I showed you this. And look, this is an actual ad. Aggressive, assaultive, and belligerent. A black man, an angry-looking black man with a fist. Now they're treating the disease with Halidol. What happened to the Serapacil? Halidol is a very powerful antipsychotic drug that gives you jaundice. It gives you fast-pounding heartbeat, makes you suicidal, makes you hallucinate. The same things, the same symptoms of schizophrenia, the side effects of this Halidol does that to you. That's what they gave these black men that now supposedly had schizophrenia. No more clean, cooperative, and communicative. No more low-dose Serapacil. Now it's assaultive and belligerent, and now it's being treated with Halidol. Man, I wish we had the um, audience that we had last night. Our people need to hear this, but it's okay. I appreciate who's on. And they took the video down. Now, so are you with me now? Making up fictitious diseases and mental disorders to justify slavery, to justify keeping us in captivity. Now the part two. Now we're going to go into part two. Did you know that around that same time in 1848, they opened a mental hospital called, I want you to write this down, Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia. Petersburg, Virginia, in 1848, the state of Virginia opened Central State Hospital. Please write this down. It was the first mental hospital opened for colored people and segregated. Did you hear what your brother said? You hearing this live and direct on the Hour of Power, a voice of truth. Not because of me, but because of what the Most High is instilling in me to give to you. Write this down. In 1848, the same year, the same time that Dr. Samuel Cartwright went from plantation to plantation in the South, making up fictitious diseases like drapetomania, they opened a mental hospital for colored people called Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia, and it was segregated for all black people. If you was to go on your smartphone, on your laptop or iPad and put in Central State Hospital right now, it'll show you African slaves sitting in. I'm going to say it for a third time. They opened a mental hospital just for black people, Central State Hospital. It used to be called the Central Hospital for the Lunatic Asylum, but then they changed it to Central State Hospital for all black people, African slaves. How did they get them? They turned it into a business. Slave masters and slave owners that can no longer handle the slaves, or they felt that these slaves that had a mental disorder that was just so out of hand, they would go to different places like this and say, can you house these out of control and mentally insane Negroes for me? They're out of control. And if they could afford it, these mental hospitals would charge them a fee. If they couldn't, they would take them over, and then it would become their property. 1848. Weren't we still in slavery in 1848? Slavery supposedly didn't end until 1865. Supposedly, under the fake Emancipation Proclamation. Let me show you how wicked these people are. And again, you can Google this. Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia. Opened up the first mental asylum for black people in the country. What they would do, take African slaves, nothing wrong with them at all, other than what Dr. Cartwright and others with these made up fictitious diseases. What they would do was take them in because they were rebelling, because they were standing up against white supremacy, trying to get their freedom. They would take them in. Imagine, I want to give you this example to segue into what I'm about to tell you. Imagine if a child would open an ice cream stand in a neighborhood and he had other children working for him for free, but at the same time the children were buying the ice cream cones and he's charging them for it. So he got the people working for him for free, which means free labor, but then the customers are also paying for the product. Man, that child would be damn near a millionaire within a month. Am I lying? This is exactly what they did at these mental hospitals that they opened for black people. And the first one being that you can Google, Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia, the first mental hospital built for black people, for slaves. So what I'm saying is they would bring in these African slaves that were runners. They would have them at the facility. They would send Miss Jones in the kitchen, the picture that you could see on Facebook, and she would be doing all the cooking. They would send Mr. Jones out in the field and have him mowing the lawn. They would have Mr. Moore fixing stuff because we were very smart. We were engineers. So what I'm saying is they didn't have to hire any employees. The patients were the patients getting paid from slave masters, and they were the employees at the same time, which had them build masses of wealth in a short amount of time because, again, they were getting paid to have the patients, but the patients were also employees. So people from the outside, if they were allowed, will come and say, I'm here to see my Aunt Gertrude. Oh, she's not available right now. Well, not. Where's she at? Oh, she's in the kitchen cooking. She's in the kitchen cooking. Well, I thought she was a patient here. Oh, she's working right now. They were sexually abusing them. Remember, this is the same slave master that took us off the shores of Africa and brought us here, was raping the men, women, and the children. They were being sexually abused and sterilized against their will. This is what they did at this Central State Hospital, the first hospital built for the mentally insane, so to speak, for black people, segregated. Because the blacks that they did have with the whites, they said, well, they need to be segregated anyway because they're impeding the progress of our white patients. This is what they said about black people who were already in other mental asylums with other white people. They called them lunatics and those who are feeble-minded. That's what they called them back then. But the Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia, was the first mental hospital built for black people and African slaves in 1868, not 1868, 1848, based off of the idea and the theology that black people needed supervision and that they would run and they have a mental disorder called drapetomania. So in that same year, this idea started floating around and they opened the mental asylum, and then many other asylums followed their same practice. And our good brother, thank you, brother, for putting the word out there about the podcast tonight. Our good brother, John DePhoenix, said the hospital is still open to the date. Yes, it is. Did you ever hear of Cherry Hospital? Cherry Hospital in Goldsboro, North Carolina. I just moved from that area. It used to be called just Goldsboro Hospital, but now it's called Cherry Hill Hospital. Still open. Do you know in 1925, a black man by the name, you can Google him, his name is Junius Wilson. Junius, Junis Wilson. This brother who was deaf and couldn't speak, but not mentally insane, he was forced into Goldsboro Hospital, which is now Cherry Hill Hospital in Goldsboro, North Carolina, still going, forced there, admitted there for supposedly raping a woman, which he did not do. This was a peaceful man. He was only 25 years old when he was admitted there in 1925. Do you know they castrated this brother and kept him there until, I believe, his death? And when he was 96, I believe around 1968, if my math is right, but I know that he was kept there for 70 some years for a rape that he didn't commit and committed to the mental asylum wing of what is now Cherry Hill Hospital in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Now it's called Cherry Hill, but it used to be called Goldsboro. You can look it up. It's still there. His name was Junius Wilson. And at 25 years old, they castrated this brother for a rape he didn't commit and put him in the mental asylum when mentally it was nothing wrong with him. He was deaf and couldn't speak, but mentally it was nothing wrong with him, and put him there. And even in the 1970s, when his family kept fighting and proved that he didn't do it, they didn't release him. They just put him in a less restrictive wing of the mental asylum, which is now Cherry Hill Hospital in Goldsboro, North Carolina. I'm giving you a pattern of what Central State Hospital did, the first mental asylum built for black people. It was mimicked and copied all over this country. Oh, brother, are y'all following me? Y'all hear what I'm saying? Give me a black fist sign if you with me. I can hear it. Oh, brother Shareef, that was way back in the day, even though 1925, when you're talking about time, that's not a lot of time. Did you know in 1883, they built a prison right outside of Detroit, Michigan, called Iona State for the Criminally Insane? I want you to Google that too. It's called Iona State for the Criminally Insane. It's right outside of the city of Detroit. Built in 1883, and it functioned all the way up to 1973 to when they shut it down. Do you know a lot of our freedom fighters, like people from the Black Panther Party, people that were in the streets fighting for the rights of our people, they were taken to this Iona State for the Criminally Insane. Let me tell you about them real quick, and then I'll be done. In around 1968, in Detroit, it was this brother by the name of Otis James, who was a young brother who was in the service, and he was home visiting his family. And he was getting ready to go to the bus station to return back to his barracks, to his home base. It was some jealous white boys that were there because they seen this brother clean cut up with his uniform on, and they started badgering him saying, "You think you're better than us?" And they started badgering him. By all accounts and reports, Otis James ignored them until two of them rolled up on him and tried to attack him because they kept trying to edge him on, but he ignored him. He's there at the bus stop, not bothering anyone. These two white boys rolled up on him, thinking that they were just going to do what they wanted with him. And Brother Otis dusted both of them off. Did you hear what your brother said? In Detroit, in 1968, only 20 miles from this Iona State for the Criminally Insane, Otis James, a black man, was at the bus stop waiting to catch his bus to go back to serve his country. Two white men started badgering him, said, "You think you're better than us because you got that uniform on." They rolled up on him. Otis James beat both of them up. The police was called, and guess where they took him? Take a wild guess. They took him to the Iona State for the Criminally Insane, 20 miles outside of Detroit. No proof, didn't lock up the white boys, took him to the Iona State for the Criminally Insane. You can Google this prison. You can Google it. I think I have a picture of it. Anyway, until I find this picture, I don't want you to think I'm making this up. So he beats them up, defending himself against these nuts who rolled up on him, meaning Otis James. They take him to, there it is, they take him to this prison, the Iona State for the Criminally Insane outside of Detroit. Do a psych eval on him, and they say something is wrong with him. Take a wild guess what they diagnosed our brother Otis James with. Schizophrenia. The man was a serviceman fighting for our country, trying to go back to his barracks, and these white boys start bothering him, and he dusts them both off. They take him to the Iona state for the criminally insane and lock him up. Do a psyche vow on him. The brother is in there. He starts reading about Elijah Muhammad. This is Otis James' words. He said, "Revelation came to me in whispers, shards of paper, smuggled books. Elijah Muhammad understands your plight," said in the voice in the night at the maximum security block. "He knows you have been wrong. He wants to help you fight back. It was not a hallucination, or if it was, then so were the scraps of cardboard passed from cell to cell. Allah is God, the blue-eyed white man is the devil." This is what Otis James said. Shortly after that, he converted to Islam, meaning Otis James, and he changed his name to Abdul Rashid Kareem. You follow me? He said, almost like Malcolm when he was in his cell, that he heard Elijah Muhammad's voice, and Elijah Muhammad said, "I know you have been wrong, and God wants you to fight back. This is not a hallucination. God is one, and the blue-eyed white man is the devil." All right. June 1968, after Otis James, now Abdul, let me make sure I got our brother's name right. Abdul Rashid Kareem converts to Islam. Now, June 1968, after 11 months in a maximum security block, after he did nothing wrong, at the Marquette facility, Abdul Rashid Kareem was sent for a psychological evaluation. By all accounts, interactions between Mr. Kareem and the prison social worker, psychologist, and physician did not go well. Mr. Kareem said, "Allahu Akbar," which means God is the greatest. That he said, "This inmate refuses to cooperate," said the social worker. "He repeatedly states that Allah is the only true judge." He is. It's the same God that y'all talking about. We just call him Allah in Arabic. "He's argumentative," said the psychologist. "He has a tough guy attitude towards white authority figures. He has paranoid delusions of police plotting against him, fights continually with officers. He lacks insight, and he tends to project his failure and frustration on the others." Oh, really? You mean his frustration of you locking him up when he served and gave his life for this country, and two white boys roll up on him and badgered him, and he defended himself, and you send him to the Iona state for the criminally insane? That frustration? He lacks insight. Clearly, this is a case of paranoid schizophrenia. We recommend that you transfer him to a different wing for further evaluation and medication. Thus, Abdul Kareem had arrived in March of 1969. He arrived with a supposed rap sheet, and now he's labeled as belligerent. Same thing that I showed you with that article when they changed around schizophrenia, militant and a terrorist. He's schizophrenic. Listen to this. Iona, the mental facility outside of Detroit, placed Mr. Kareem in confinement in its maximum supervision ward. There he lived in and out of seclusion and restraints for the next 6 years. The medication log described doses of antipsychotic medication that seemed beyond comprehension by today's standards. This is their words at Iona State for the criminally insane. Let me repeat that. He was sent to a maximum security wing and ward. He lived in and out of seclusion and in restraints for the next 6 years. The medication log described doses of antipsychotic medication that seemed beyond comprehension. Thorazine, 250 milligrams 4 times a day. Unable to control his destructive impulses, we upped Thorazine to 500 milligrams a day, along with what? with what did I talked about last night? Halidol. 5 milligrams 3 times a day. Also gave him molaloril, 500 milligrams. And then upped Halidol up to 10 milligrams, 3 to 4 times a day. Thorazine, Halidol, and molaloril, 500 milligrams, 4 to 5 times a day. Have you ever taken headache medication? 150 milligrams, 250 milligrams. That stuff is strong. This is antipsychotic medication. 500 milligrams, 3 to 4 times a day. Even by their own logs, Mr. Kareem was never heard of again because they shut down the prison in 1973. He was in solitary confinement. They had other reports of this, and finally they shut this terror killing ground down known as I own a state for the criminally insane. They shut it down in 1973. No one still to this day knows what happened to our brother Abdul Rashid Kareem, formerly Otis James. 500 milligrams of 2 to 3 different milligrams. 500 milligrams of 2 to 3 different medications 3 to 4 times a day. 10 milligrams of Halidol 3 to 4 times a day. And then the other 1 or 2 medications, 500 milligrams. 2-3 different medications 3 to 4 times a day. Halidol, 10 milligrams, which is still strong considering you taking all them other medications 3 to 4 times a day. No one still to this day knows what happened to our brother Kareem. And again, that's in this book, Protest Psychosis, How Schizophrenia Became a Black Disease. This was just in 1968. Don't goddamn tell me about something, oh, you're talking about slavery. Man, this is still going on today. Still drugging us up, diagnosing us, misdiagnosing us with fictitious diseases in 2020. Well, what is that, Brother Shareef? And then I'll be done. Have you ever goddamn heard of ADHD? Have you ever heard of ADHD? You may have been diagnosed with it. Your children, I hope not, may have been diagnosed with it. Grandchildren, nieces, nephews. And before I briefly discuss that, I want you to look this brother up. Y'all awful quiet. Are y'all with me? I want you to look this name up. Dr. Leon Eisenberg, a Jew. Dr. Leon Eisenberg, last name spelled E-I-S-E-N-B-E-R-G. Dr. Leon Eisenberg. Do you know that he is the father of ADHD? He is the one that came up with ADHD back in the late 70s, I believe. Because remember, when we were going to school, we never heard of it. Sit your ass down. You're going to learn this reading. You're going to learn this math. And that's the end of it. And then way back in the day, they could take a paddle to your ass. That was the pill. And before you even got to the school, those who were raised in black culture by black parents, we got the medicine before we left. The same medicine that we used to get before we went to the grocery store. We get to the door at the grocery store. Don't goddamn ask for nothing because you ain't getting nothing. And if you go in here showing your ass, I'm going to beat your ass in front of everyone. Do you understand? We said, yeah. We got that same talk, which was medicine, before we went to school. Don't go up there acting up in front of them white people. Act like you got some sense, or I'm gonna beat your ass. Enough said. Then all of a sudden, when they put crack cocaine in the black community in the late 70s and 80s, then all of a sudden, we had what we called crack babies. And then the same time, they start coming up with, again, these fictitious diseases called ADHD, these 80s and 90s babies. Dr. Leon Eisenberg is the father of ADHD. He's the one that quoted attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. First, it was just called attention deficit disorder. But then in the late 80s, after they damn infected us with crack cocaine, he changed that to ADHD when at first it was called ADD, attention deficit disorder. But then when the crack came into the black communities and the mothers were addicted to crack and passing that addiction on to the children, he conveniently changed the name, you can look this up, to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Do you know, just a couple years ago, on this man's deathbed, meaning Dr. Leon Eisenberg, he admitted he made the whole thing up for financial gain for himself and the pharmaceutical companies. Did you hear what your brother just said? Share this message. Share this message. Dr. Leon Eisenberg, a Jew, the father of ADHD. First it was ADD, attention deficit disorder. Did you ever wonder why and how it got changed? Then in the 80s, with the crack cocaine, it was changed to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. If you fidget, if you move too much, if you can't finish tasks, these are the symptoms. It's right in this book, a book that you should get, the DSM. They're on the DSM-5 now. Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the Bible of mental disorders. If you eat too much, if you're hallucinating, all the mental disorders are in this book. If you go see a counselor, go see a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, the first thing they pull out to figure out what's going on with you, they're not going to pull out Proverbs. They're not going to pull out Psalms. They're not going to pull out a surah from the Quran. They're going to pull out this book and they're going to diagnose you with something and a pill is going to follow. Dr. Leon Eisenberg, the father of ADHD, on his deathbed. Are y'all following me? Are you with me? Are you with your brother? This is all coming from the Most High. Don't look at me. Say, thank you, Most High God, for giving us this information. On his deathbed, a couple of years ago, Dr. Leon Eisenberg, the father of ADHD, admitted that he made the whole thing up. And listen what word he used. He said this is a fictitious disease, the same vocabulary from 1840s of Dr. Samuel Cartwright, the same one that made up drapetomania. Now his cousin, his brother, his friend, his descendant, indirectly, Dr. Leon Eisenberg made up a fictitious disease named ADHD. He said it on his deathbed. You can Google it. And then they try to write it off and say, oh, he was senile. He was out of his mind. He didn't know what he was saying. And they swept it under the rug. No, he wasn't. He knew exactly what he was saying. Because a lot of times when people are on their deathbed, they figure, hey, what do I got to lose? No one can't do nothing to me. I'm going to let it all out. And maybe it eased his conscience that he came up with a fictitious disease, just like Samuel Cartwright did with drapetomania. He came out with a fictitious disease that would destroy masses of people, mainly our people, for generations to come. It is a fictitious disease. Okay. A fictitious disease he admitted it on his deathbed, Dr. Leon Eisenberg. I know what some people saying, but my nephew or so-and-so was on it and we put him on medication and he's doing much better now. He's calmer. So what do you say to that, Brother Shareef? Well, I say to you that I've been in this field working with hundreds of students, mainly ours, because by numbers, they don't typically diagnose white children with ADHD. And the interventions is just that, interventions. Very rare medication. Now, what they call the low class white people, the trailer trash, did they almost look at them like they look at us? They'll diagnose them. They'll throw them on some pills. But typically, you go to these schools and these children bounce around just like any other child. They ain't doping them up with that medicine. But Brother Shareef, my nephew, my son, or whoever, he was just all over the place. What you feeding him? What you feeding him? What's your environment like at home? Is he eating a bunch of sugar? Boys are naturally more active than girls anyway. And all children should be active. If you got a child that just sits there and says and does nothing, that's what's abnormal. Not a child that is active, especially boys. It is normal for boys and children and girls to be moving around. But we've been in this country, in the hells of North America, they make us think it's abnormal for a child that is active. So that's what I would say to that, with my many years of experience dealing with black boys and these children supposedly diagnosed with this fictitious disease admitted by the person that came up with it, Dr. Leon Eisenberg. That would be my rebuttal. What you feeding them? What's the environment like at home? Is it discipline? Does he go or does she go to bed at a decent time? But he's calm now because he's been taking the medicines. Oh, you mean the Focalin, the Strattera, the Adderall, the Ritalin, the Metadate 30, the Concerta, the Strattera, all them drugs? Well, no wonder he's calm. He's on drugs. Any drug is mind and mood altering. So of course he's calmer now because he's on drugs. But do you know the side effects of those drugs? Tics, tremors, suicidal thoughts, hallucinations, aggressive mood swings, can't stay focused. Is that worth it? And it's many more side effects to these. And the drugs that they're giving them slows their brain down. Because a child's brain, because they can give them these drugs as early as 6 years old, a child's brain isn't fully developed, so these psychotropic drugs slows them down. Where with an adult's brain is fully developed, them same drugs like Ritalin and Adderall speeds them up. How do we know? It's NFL players right now on Ritalin and Adderall to give them more energy and to hype them up so they can go knock the hell out of someone on the football field. Did you hear what your brother said? Tell me I'm lying. It is NFL players right now on Adderall because it speeds them up and makes them hyper. You be seeing them, you just thinking they hype into the game. Some of them are on drugs called Adderall because, again, the adult's brain is fully developed, so it speeds them up. But since the child's brain is not fully developed, it slows them down. So of course they slow down. They're on drugs. Finishing out. So the solution to that is, what are you feeding the children? What's the environment like at home? Is there discipline? Do they go to bed at the same time? Do they go to bed at all? I get clients that said they were up all... Thought I seen a glitch there. Let me wrap this up. Now, are y'all still with me? Because I just seen it glitch. Are y'all still with me? Give me a black fist sign or heart emoji if you feeling this message, if you're learning from it, and you understand what I'm saying, if I'm making sense. Finishing out, ADHD. It's supposed to be a diagnosable disease. That's what they say. It is a diagnosable, thank you. It is a diagnosable disease that's diagnosed by a doctor, and the doctor has to prescribe the medicine. Me being a therapist, I cannot diagnose. Well, I can diagnose someone with ADHD, but it's not official until a psychologist or a psychiatrist comes behind me and says, yeah, That's what it is. And I certainly can't dispense any medicine because I'm not a doctor. Only a psychiatrist or an MD doctor can dispense the medicine. Again, I can diagnose it, but the final diagnosis is going to go in their treatment plan, in their psych eval, has to come from a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a doctor. Now, it's a diagnosable disease, so to speak, even though Dr. Leon Eisenberg said he made it up on his deathbed. You can Google that. It'll come all up on Snoops and all over the internet. Something they hid from you. It's a diagnosable disease. So, let me give you this quick analogy. I'm diabetic, okay? Pray for your brother. I know I don't look it, but I'm diabetic. A diagnosable disease. I can't turn that off, even though, like Dr. Sebi said, I think it could be cured. But typically, diagnosable diseases, you just can't turn it on and off. So just because I go to my favorite restaurant, which it is, I'm just using this as example. If I go to Golden Corral, all you can eat, I can't say, oh, I'm not diabetic today. I'm going to just eat cake, ice cream, or whatever. Oh, no, you can't, Shareef. You can't do that. You're diabetic. You can't have all that sugar. Oh, no, I'm not diabetic today. Well, just because you're at your favorite restaurant, you just don't turn that disease off. You're still diabetic. You still have to adhere to your diet unless you want to get sick. Because it's a diagnosable disease. Just can't turn it on and off. So my point is, if ADHD is truly a diagnosable disease, and they call it a disease, you can get medication for it. I just gave you some of the medications. Ritalin, Adderall, Strattera, Focalin, Metadate 30, and many more. They're coming out with more. Concerta. If it's truly a diagnosable disease, how come it seems like children can turn it on and off when they want? If it's a diagnosable disease, either you have it, goddammit, or you don't. What do you mean by that, Brother Shareef? They say the symptoms of ADHD: lacks focus, can't pay attention, can't sit still. They acting a fool in school, bouncing all over the place. Now, I'm not making fun or mockery. I'm just telling you what I see, what I work with, and what you've seen and observed. Maybe yourself. Can't sit still, can't focus, can't finish tasks, bouncing all over the place, right? But then some of these same children sit home on PlayStation, the Nintendo, and play games for hours. Some of them won't even get up and go to the bathroom. If you have ADHD, a diagnosable disease, and you can't pay attention, how the hell are you all of a sudden able to pay attention to the video game? You want to know? That's instructions. That's a TV. You have to pay attention. Even though it's a game, it's still something that requires your attention. It's still something that requires you to sit still. And they do it for hours. I thought you had ADHD. You want another example? Some of these same children that supposedly can't take directions, can't sit still, can't follow directions, all over the place. They play sports. Football, basketball practice. The last time I checked, football, basketball practice can last anywhere for an hour, hour and a half, if not longer, depending on you in high school, college, or whatever. How are you able to listen to plays from the coach, from the basketball coach, follow directions, remember the plays, and implement them if you have ADHD? I thought you had a disease that kept you from paying attention. Huh? Am I making sense? If this is a disease that you can't turn it on and off, how are they able in certain domains, certain situations, certain circumstances? 1 minute they have it, a school that they don't want to be at, they ain't learning about themselves, they just don't like it, they can't pay attention, they can't sit still, but then they go to a different setting, and then all of a sudden they can pay attention for hours. Some of them on the phone with their boo for hours, won't even go to the bathroom or get something to eat. That's awful strange. Dr. So-and-so, can you explain that? Can you explain that? How come the society supports every other disability, but they don't support ADHD? What do you mean by that, Brother Shareef? Well, if you go to the mall or if you go to certain places, they have hearing impaired. They even have, because I work with some of these children, they have Braille for children that can't see. They have Braille. They have hearing impaired on the TV, hearing impaired, handicap signs. For those who are handicapped, this society supports those who has some kind of deficiency or disease. How come the society don't support ADHD? Some of y'all go to church, be there for hours once again, and I don't hear the preacher say, well, we know we may have or do have people in the audience that can't pay attention, they can't comprehend. I'm about to drop God's word. I want you to get this, so come back for the 12 o'clock service for y'all who have ADHD, and I will have a special service, a special message just for you. Have you ever heard of such a thing? No, everyone sits at that particular time and listens to the message. How about at work? If you work on an assembly line, that requires attention. Some of the things you can actually harm yourself. Have machines where your hand could get caught. I never heard of an assembly line that says, well, we know some of y'all got ADHD. Y'all can't pay attention. You can't follow directions. So this assembly line is for those who have ADHD, and this is for our regular workers. Have you ever heard of such a thing? That requires attention. That requires following directions. Almost any job you have requires you to follow some kind of directions. How about driving? Where not only is your life, but dozens and maybe hundreds of other people's life is on the line. They got a HOV lane. You got to follow directions to get to your destination. 30 miles to Virginia, 100 miles to Florida, 5 miles down, take next exit, whatever. They got a HOV lane. Why don't they have a ADHD lane when many people's lives is on the line? When you're driving, that requires attention. That requires focus. That requires you to follow directions. Know the ADHD lane, but they got a HOV lane? Do you feel what I'm saying? A fictitious disease made up back then called drapetomania, and more fictitious diseases made up right now. And then switch the narrative of schizophrenia. How schizophrenia became a black disease. Went from clean, cooperative, and communicative to assaultive and belligerent. Went to treating it with a low-dose pill called Serapicil to a dangerous high-dose pill called Haldol. Locked our brother Otis James, better known as Abdul Karim Rashid, up in Iona State Facility. Iona State for the criminally insane, for him defending himself. And because he converted to Islam, once again under the leadership of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, fought against oppression, started really raising his consciousness. They said he must have paranoid schizophrenia, and like I read to you earlier, gave him 2 to 3 medications with 500 milligrams apiece, and then gave him Haldol with 10 milligrams, and then all the medications gave him that 3 to 4 times a day. He was barely awake because he was so doped up on drugs, and once they shut the facility down, to this day, no one knows what happened to him. Before I finish out, does anyone have any questions? And again, look up Dr. Leon Eisenberg, the father of ADHD, and he admitted on his deathbed a few years ago that he made up ADHD because he is the father of ADHD, said he made it up. It's fictitious. For financial gain, the pharmaceutical companies make millions upon billions of dollars off of psychotropic drugs and ADHD drugs. Dr. Leon Eisenberg, look him up. The Hour of Power, a voice of truth. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Any questions or comments on anything that I said tonight? Do you need me to repeat anything? Any questions or comments? Did you learn from this lesson? Okay, I'm assuming that y'all are okay. And I hope you learned from this message. If you're bold enough, please share this message. And again, write them names down. Remember these books, Protest Psychosis, how schizophrenia became a black disease. I'm not saying people don't have schizophrenia. I'm just saying how they changed the narrative to use it as a justification to oppress us and to discredit us and to unjustify